This is the Southeast North Carolina Radio Reading Service, a United Way partner agency. We welcome you to its program entitled Off the Bookshelf. Your reader is Hiba Had, and I will be reading the Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. Last time we got introduced to Amir, the son of a rich, tough businessman who was building an orphanage, and Hassan, the son of Ali, who worked for Amir's father. We also knew how close Amir and Hassan were. We got into chapter 4. In 1933, the year Baba was born, and the year Zahir Shah began his 40-year reign of Afghanistan. Two brothers, young men from a wealthy and reputable family in Kabul, got behind the wheel of their father's Ford Roadster. High on hashish and masked on French wine, they struck and killed the Hazara husband and wife on the road to Batman. The police brought the somewhat contrite young men and the dead couple's 5-year-old orphan boy before my grandfather, who was a highly regarded judge and a man of impeccable reputation. After hearing the brothers' account and their father's plea for mercy, my grandfather ordered the two young men to go to Kandahar at once and enlist in the army for a year. This despite the fact that their father had somewhat managed to obtain them exemptions from the draft. Their father argued, but not too vehemently, and in the end, everyone agreed to the punishment that had been perhaps harsh but fair. As for the orphanage, my grandfather adopted him into his own household, and as for the orphan, my grandfather adopted him into his own household, and told the other servants to tutor him and be kind to him. That boy was Ali. Ali and Baba grew up together as childhood playmates, at least until polio crippled Ali's leg, just like Hassan and I grew up a generation later. Baba was always telling us about the mischief he and Ali used to cause, and Ali would shake his head and say, "But Agha Sahib, tell them who was the architect of the mischief and who was the poor laborer." Baba would laugh and throw his arm around Ali. But in none of his stories, Baba did ever refer to Ali as his friend. The curious thing was, I never thought of Hassan and me as friends either. Not in the usual sense, anyhow. Never mind that we taught each other to ride a bicycle with no hands, or to build a fully functional homemade camera out of a cardboard box. Never mind that we spent entire winters flying kites, running kites. Never mind that, to me, the face of Afghanistan is that of a boy with a chin-boned frame, a shaved head, and low-set ears, a boy with a Chinese doll face perpetually lit by a hair-licked smile. Never mind of those things, because history isn't easy to overcome. Neither is religion in the end. I was a Pashtun, and he was a Hazara. I was Sunni, and he was Shia. And nothing was ever going to change that. Nothing. But we were kids who had learned to crawl together, and no history, ethnicity, society, or religion was going to change that either. I spent most of the first 12 years of my life playing with Hassan. Sometimes my entire childhood seemed like a long, lazy summer day with Hassan, chasing each other between tangles of trees in my father's yard, playing hide and seek, cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, insect torture, with our crowning achievement undeniably the time we plucked the stringer of a bee and tied a string around the poor thing to yank it back every time it took flight. We chased the Kochi, the nomads who passed through Kabul on their way to the mountains of the north. We would hear their caravans approaching our neighborhood, the mewling of their sheep, the baying of their boats, the jingle bells around their camels' necks. We'd run outside to watch the caravan plod through our street, men with dusty, weather-beaten faces and women dressed in long, colorful shawls, beads and silver bracelets around their wrists and ankles. We hurled pebbles at their goats. We squirted water on their mules. I made Hassan sit on the water of ailing corn and fire pebbles with his slingshots at the camels' rears. We saw our first Western together, Rio Bravo, with John Wayne, at the cinema park, across the street from my favorite bookstore. I remember begging Baba to take us to Iran so so we could meet John Wayne. Baba burst out in gales of his deep-throated laughter, a sound not unlike a truck engine revving up, and we could talk again. And when we could talk again, explained to us the concept of voice dubbing. Hassan and I were stunned, dazed. John Wayne didn't really speak Farsi, and he wasn't Iranian. He was an American. Just like the friendly, long-haired men and women we always saw hanging out around in Kabul, dressed in their tattered, brightly colored shirts. We saw Rio Bravo 3 times, but we saw our favorite Western, The Magnificent Seven, 13 times. With each viewing, we cried at the end when the Mexican kids buried Charles Bronson, who, as it turned out, wasn't Iranian either. We took strolls in the musty-smelling bazaars of the Sharainu section of Kabul, or the New City, west of the Wazir Akbar Khan district. We talked about whatever film we had just seen and walked amid the bustling crowds of bazaarists. We sneaked our way among the merchants and the beggars, wandered through narrow alleys cramped with rows of tiny, tightly packed stalls. Baba gave us each a weekly allowance of 10 Afghanis, and we spent it on warm Coca-Cola and rosewater ice creams topped with crushed pistachios. During the second year, we had a daily routine. By the time I dragged myself out of bed and lumbered to the bathroom, Hassan had already washed up, prayed the morning namaz with Ali, and prepared my breakfast, hot black tea with 3 sugar cubes, and a slice of toasted naan topped with my favorite sour cherry marmalade, all neatly placed on the dining table. While I ate and complained about homework, Hassan made my bed, polished my shoes, ironed my outfit for the day, packed my books and pencils. I'd hear him singing to himself in the foyer as he ironed, singing old Hazara songs in his nasal voice. Then Baba and I drove off in his black Ford Mustang, a car that drew envious looks everywhere because it was the same car Steve McQueen had driven in Bullet, a film that played in one theater for 6 months. Hassan stayed home and helped Ali with the day's chores, hand washing dirty clothes and hanging them to dry in the yard, sweeping the floors, buying fresh naan from the bazaar, marinating meat for dinner, watering the lawn. After school, Hassan and I met up, grabbed a book, and trotted up a bowl-shaped hill just north of my father's property in Wazir Akbar Khan. There was an old abandoned cemetery atop the hill with rows of unmarked headstones and tangles of bushwood clogging the aisles. Seasons of rain and snow had turned the iron gate rusty and left the cemetery low white stone walls in decay. There was a pomegranate tree near the entrance to the cemetery. One summer day, I used one of Ali's kitchen knives to carve our names on it, Amin and Hassan, the sultans of Kabul. Those words made it formal. The tree was ours. After school, Hassan and I climbed its branches and snatched its blood-red pomegranates. After we'd eaten the fruit and wiped our hands on the grass, I would read to Hassan. Sitting cross-legged, sunlight and shadows of pomegranate leaves dancing on his face, Hassan absently plucked blades of grass from the ground as I read him stories he couldn't read for himself. That Hassan would grow up illiterate like Ali and most Hazaras had been decided the minute he was born, perhaps even the moment he had been conceived in Sanobar's unwelcoming womb. After all, what use did a servant have for the written word? But despite his illiteracy, or maybe because of it, Hassan was drawn to the mystery of words, seduced by a secret world forbidden to him. I read him poems and stories, sometimes riddles, though I stopped reading those when I saw he was far better at solving them than I was. So I read him unchallenging things, like the misadventures of the bumbling Mullah Nasruddin and his donkey. We sat for hours under that tree, sat there until the sun faded in the west, and still Hassan insisted that we had enough daylight for one more story, one more chapter. My favorite part of reading to Hassan was when we came across a big word that he did not know. I teased him, expose his ignorance. One time, I was reading him a Mullah Nasruddin story, and he stopped me. What does that word mean? Which one? Imbecile. You don't know what it means, I said, grinning. Nay, Amir Agha. But it's such a common word. Still, I don't know it. If he felt like stinging it off my teeth, his smiling face didn't show it. Well, everyone in my school knows what it means, I said. Let's see. Imbecile. It means smart, intelligent. I'll use it in a sentence for you. When it comes to words, Hassan is an imbecile. Ah, he said, nodding. I would always feel guilty about it later, so I tried to make it up for it by giving him one of my old shirts or a broken toy. I would tell myself that was amends enough for a harmless prank. Hassan's favorite book by far was the Shahnameh, the 10th century epic of ancient Persian heroes. He liked all of the chapters, the Shahs of old, Faridun, Zal, and Rudabi. But his favorite story and mine was Rostam and Sohrab, the tale of the great warrior Rostam and his fleet-footed horse, Raksh. Rostam mortally wounded his valiant nemesis, Sohrab, in battle, only to discover that Sohrab is his long-lost son. Stricken with grief, Rostam hears his son's dying words. If thou art indeed my father, then hast thou stained thy sword in the life blood of thy son, and thou didst of thine obstinacy. For I sought to turn thee unto love, and I implored of thee thy name, for I thought to behold in thee the tokens recounted of my mother. But I appealed unto thy heart in vain, and now is the time gone for meeting. Read it again, please, Amir Agha, Hassan would say. Sometimes tear pooled in Hassan's eyes as I read him this passage, and always wondered whom he wept for. The grief-stricken Rostam whose tears his clothes uncovers his head with ashes, or the dying Sohrab who only longed for his father's love. Personally, I couldn't see the tragedy in Rostam's fate. After all, didn't all fathers in their secret hearts harbor a desire to kill their sons? One day in July 1973, I played another little trick on Hassan. I was reading to him, and suddenly I strayed from the written story. I pretended I was reading from the book, flipping the pages regularly, but I had abandoned the text altogether, taking over the story and made up my own. Hassan, of course, was oblivious to this. To him, the words on the page were a scramble of codes, indecipherable, mysterious. Words were secret doorways, and I held all the keys. After I started to ask him if he liked the story, a giggle rising in my throat, when Hassan began to clap. What are you doing? I said. That was the best story you've read me in a long time, he said, still clapping. I laughed. Really? Really? That's fascinating, I muttered. I meant it, too. This was wholly unexpected. Are you sure, Hassan? He was still clapping. It was great, Amir Agha. Will you read me more of it tomorrow? Fascinating, I repeated, a little breathless, feeling like a man who discovers a buried treasure in his own backyard. Walking down the hospital hill, thoughts were exploding in my head like fireworks at Shaman. Best story you've read me in a long time, he'd said. I had read him a lot of stories. Hassan was asking me something. What? I said. What do you mean, fascinating? I laughed, clutched him in a hug, and planted a kiss on his cheek. What was that for? He said, blushing. I gave him a friendly smile. You're a prince, Hassan. You're a prince and I love you. That same night, I wrote my first short story. It took me 30 minutes. It was a dark little tale about a man who found a magic cup and learned that if he went into the cup, the tears turned into pearls. But even though he had always been poor, he was a happy man and rarely shed a tear. So he found ways to make himself sad so that his tears could make him rich. As the as the pearls piled up, so did the greed grow. The story ended up with a man sitting on a mountain of pearls, knife in hand, weeping helplessly into the cup with his beloved wife's slain body in his arms. That evening, I climbed the stairs and walked into Baba's smoking room. In my hands, the 2 sheets of paper on which I had scribbled the story. Baba and Rahim Khan were smoking pipes and sipping brandy when I came in. What is it, Amir? Baba said, reclining on the sofa and lacing his hands behind his head. Blue smoke whirled around his face. His glare made my throat feel dry. I cleared it and told him I'd written the story. Baba nodded and gave a thin smile that conveyed little more than feigned interest. Well, that's very good, isn't it? He said. Then nothing more. He just looked at me through the cloud of smoke. I probably stood there for under a minute, but to this day, it was one of the longest minutes of my life. Seconds plodded by, each separated from the next by an eternity. Air grew heavy down, almost solid. I was breathing bricks. Baba went on staring me down, and didn't offer to read. As always, it was Rahim Khan who rescued me. He held out his hand and favored me with a smile that had nothing faint about it. May I have it, Amir Jan? I would very much like to read it. Baba hardly ever used the term of endearment, Jan, when he addressed me. Baba shrugged and stood up. He looked relieved, as if he too had been rescued by Rahim Khan. Yes, give it to Kaka Rahim. I'm going upstairs to get ready. And with that he left the room. Most days I worshipped Baba with an intensity approaching the religious, but right then I wished I could open my veins and drain his cursed blood from my body. An hour later, as the evening sky dimmed, the 2 of them drove off in my father's car to attend a party. On his way out, Rahim Khan hunkered before me and handed me my story and another folded piece of paper. He flashed a smile and winked. For you, read it later. Then he paused and added a single word that did more to encourage me to pursue writing than any compliment an editor has ever paid me. That word was bravo. When they left, I sat on my bed and wished Rahim Khan had been my father. Then I thought of Baba, and his great big chest, and how good it felt when he held me against it, how he smelled of bread in the morning, and how his beard tickled my face. I was overcome with such sudden guilt that I bolted to the bathroom and vomited in the sink. Later that night, curled up in bed, I read Rahim Khan's note over and over. I read it like this. Amir Jan, I enjoyed your story very much. Mashallah, God has granted you a special gift. It is now your duty to hone that talent, because a person who wastes his God's given talents is a donkey. You have written your story with sound grammar and interesting style, but the most impressive thing about your story is that it has irony. You may not even know what the word means, but you will someday. It is something that some writers reach for their entire careers and never attain. You have achieved it with your first story. My door is and always will be open for you, Amir Jan. I shall hear any story you have to tell me. Bravo. your friend, Rahim. Buoyed up by Rahim Khan's note, I grabbed the story and hurried downstairs to the foyer where Ali and Hassan were sleeping on a mattress. That was the only time they slept in the house. When Baba was away and Ali has to watch over me, I shook Hassan awake and asked him if he wanted to hear a story. He rubbed his sleep-clogged eyes and stretched. Now, what time is it? Never mind the time. The story is special. I wrote it myself. I whispered, hoping not to awake Ali. Hassan's face brightened. Then I have to hear it, he said, already pulling the blanket off him. I read it to him in the living room by the marble fireplace. No playful straying from the words this time. This was about me. Hassan was the perfect audience in many ways, totally immersed in the tale, his face shifting with the changing tones in the story. When I read the last sentence, he made a muted clapping sound with his hands. Mashallah, Amir Agha. Bravo. He was beaming. Do you like it? I asked, getting my second taste, and how sweet it was of a positive review. Someday, inshallah, you will be a great writer, Hassan said, and people all over the world will hear your stories. Will hear you read your stories. You exaggerate, Hassan, I said, loving him more for it. No, you will be great and famous, he insisted. Then he paused, as if on the verge of adding something. He weighed his words and cleared his throat. But will you permit me to ask a question about your story? He said shyly. Of course. Well, he started, broke off. Tell me, Hassan, I said. I smiled, though suddenly the insecure writer in me wasn't so sure he wanted to hear it. Well, he said, if I may ask, why did the man kill his wife? In fact, why did he ever have to feel sad to shed tears? Couldn't he have just smelled an onion? I was stunned. That particular point was so obvious. It was utterly stupid. Hadn't even occurred to me. I moved my lips soundlessly. It appeared that on that same night I had learned about one of writing's objectives, irony. I would also be introduced to one of its pitfalls, the plot hole, taught by Hassan of all people. Hassan, who couldn't read and had never written a single word in his entire life. A voice, cold and dark, suddenly whispered in my ear. What does he know, that illiterate Hazara? He'll never be anything but a cook. How dare he criticize you? Well, I began, but I never got to finish that sentence, because suddenly Afghanistan changed forever. Chapter 5. Something roared like thunder. The air shook a little, and we heard a rat-tat-tat-tat of gunfire. Father, Hassan cried. We sprung to our feet and raced out of the living room. We found Ali hobbling frantically across the foyer. Father, what's that sound? Hassan yelled, his hands outstretched towards Ali. Ali wrapped his arms around us. A white light flashed, lit the sky in silver. It flashed again and was followed by a rapid staccato of gunfire. They're hunting ducks, Ali said in a hoarse voice. They hunt ducks at night, you know. Don't be afraid. A siren went off in the distance. Somewhere glass shattered, and someone shouted. I heard people on the streets, jolted from sleep and probably still in their pajamas, with ruffled hair and puffy eyes. Hassan was crying. Ali pulled him close, clutched him with tenderness. Later, I would tell myself I hadn't felt envious of Hassan, not at all. We stayed huddled that way until the early hours of the morning. The shootings and explosions had lasted less than an hour, but they had frightened us badly, because none of us had ever heard gunshots in the streets. They were foreign sounds to us then. That generation of Afghan children whose ears would know nothing but the sounds of bombs and gunfire was not yet born. Huddled together in the dining room and waiting for the sun to rise, None of us had any notion the, that a way of life had ended. Our way of life. If not quite yet, then at least it was the beginning of the end. The end, the official end, would come first in April 1978 with a communist coup d'etat, and then in December 1979, when Russian tanks would roll into the very same streets where Hassan and I played, bringing the death of the Afghanistan I knew and marking the start of a still ongoing era of bloodletting. Just before sunrise, Baba's car peeled into the driveway. His door slammed shut and his running footsteps pounded the stairs. Then he appeared in the doorway, and I saw something on his face, something I didn't recognize right away because I've never seen it before. Fear. Amir, Hassan, he exclaimed as he ran to us, opening his arms wide. They blocked all the roads and the telephone didn't work. I was so worried. We let him wrap us in his arms, and for a brief insane moment I was glad about whatever had happened that night. They weren't shooting ducks after all. As it turned out, they hadn't shot much of anything that night of July 17, 1973. Kabul awoke the next morning to find that the monarchy was a thing of the past. The king, Zahir Shah, was away in Italy. In his absence, his cousin Dawood Khan had ended the king's 40-year reign with a bloodless coup. I remember Hassan and I crouching the next morning outside my father's study, as Baba and Rahim Khan sipped black tea and listened to breaking news of coup on Radio Kabul. Amir Agha, Hassan whispered. What? What's Republic? I shrugged. I don't know. On Baba's radio, they were saying that word, Republic, over and over again. Amir Agha, what? Does Republic mean Father and I will have to move away? I don't know. I don't think so. I whispered back. Hassan considered this. Amir Agha, what? I don't want them to send me and Father away. I smiled. Bas, you donkey. No one's sending you away. Amir Agha, what? Do you want to climb our tree? My smile broadened. That was another thing about Hassan. He always knew when to say the right thing. The news on the radio was getting pretty boring. Hassan went to his shack to get ready, and I ran upstairs to grab a book. Then I went to the kitchen, stuffed my pockets with handfuls of pine nuts, and ran outside to find Hassan waiting for me. We burst through the front gates and headed for the hill. We crossed the residential street and were trekking through a barren patch of rough land that led to the hill when suddenly a rock struck Hassan in the back. We whirled around and my heart dropped. Asif and two of his friends, Wadi and Kamal, were approaching us. Asif was the son of one of my father's friends, Mahmoud, an airline pilot. His family lived a few streets south of our home, in a posh, high-walled compound with palm trees. If you were a kid living in the Wazir Akbar Khan section of Kabul, we knew about Asif and his famous stainless steel brass knuckles. Hopefully, not through personal experience. Born to a German mother and an Afghan father, the blonde, blue-eyed Asif towered over the other kids. His well-earned reputation for savagery preceded him on the streets, flanked by his obeying friends. He walked the neighborhood like a Khan, strolling through his land with his eager-to-please entourage. His word was law, and if you needed a little legal education, then those brass knuckles were just the right teaching tool. I saw him use those knuckles once on a kid from the Kartik Char district. I will never forget how Asif's blue eyes glinted with the light, not entirely sane, and how he grinned as he pummeled that poor kid unconscious. Some of the boys in Wazir Akbar Khan had nicknamed him Asif Goshkhor, or Asif the Ear Eater. Of course, none of them dared utter it to his face unless they wished to suffer the same fate as the poor kid who had unwittingly inspired that nickname when he had fought Asif over a kite and ended up fishing his right ear from a muddy gutter. Years later, I learned an English word for the creature that Asif was, a word for which a good Farsi equivalent does not exist: sociopath. Of all the neighborhood boys who tortured Ali, Asif was by far the most relentless. He was, in fact, the originator of the Babalu jeer. Hey Babalu, who did you eat today, huh? Come on Babalu, give us a smile. And on days when he felt particularly inspired, he spiced up his badgering a little. Hey you flat-nosed Babalu, who did you eat today? Tell us, you slanted-eyed donkey. Now he was walking toward us, hands on his hips, his sneakers kicking up little puffs of dust. Good morning, Kunis, Asif exclaimed, waving. Fag, that was another of his favorite insults. Hassan retreated behind me as the three older boys closed in. They stood before us, three tall boys dressed in jeans and t-shirts, towering over us all. Asif crossed his thick arms on his chest, a savage sort of grin on his lips. Not for the first time, it occurred to me that Asif might not be entirely sane. It also occurred to me how lucky I was to have Baba as my father, the sole reason I believe Asif had mostly refrained from harassing me too much. He tipped his chin to Hassan. Hey flat-nose, he said. How's Babalu? Hassan said nothing and crept another step behind me. Have you heard the news, boys? Asif said, his grin never faltering. The king is gone. Good riddance. Long live the president. My father knows Dawood Khan. Did you know that, Amir? So does my father, I said. In reality, I had no idea if that was true or not. So does my father, Asif mimicked me in a whining voice. Kamal and Wali cackled in unison. I wished Baba was there. Well, Dawood Khan dined at our house last year, Asif went on. How'd you like that, Amir? I wondered if anyone would hear us scream in that remote patch of land. Baba's house was a good kilometer away. I wished we'd stay at that house. Do you know that I will tell Dawood Khan the next time he comes to our house for dinner, Asif said. I'm going to have a little chat with him, man to man, mark to mark. Tell him that what I told my mother about Hitler. Now there was a leader, a great leader, a man with vision. I'll tell Dawood Khan to remember that if they had let Hitler finish what he had started, the world would be a better place now. Baba says Hitler was crazy, that he ordered a lot of innocent people killed. I heard myself say before I could clamp a hand on my mouth. Asif snickered. He sounds like my mother, and she's German. She should know better. But then they want you to believe that, don't they? They don't want you to know the truth. I don't know who they were or what truth they were hiding, and I didn't want to find out. I wished I hadn't said anything. I wished again I'd look up and see Baba coming up the hill. But you have to read books they don't give you out in school, Asif said. I have, and my eyes have been opened. Now I have a vision, and I'm going to share it with our new president. Do you know what it is? I shook my head. He'd tell me anyway. Asif always answered his own questions. His blue eyes flickered to Hassan. Afghanistan is the land of Pashtuns. It always has been, always will be. We are the true Afghans, the pure Afghans, not this flat-nosed nose here. His people pollute our homeland, our watan. They dirty our blood. He made a sweeping, grandiose gesture with his hands. Afghanistan for Pashtuns, I say. That's my vision. Asif shifted his gaze to me again. He looked like someone coming out of a good dream. Too late for Hitler, he said, but not for us. He reached for something from the back pocket of his jeans. I'll ask the president to do what the king didn't have the quwwah to do, to rid Afghanistan of the dirty Kasif Hazaras. Just let us go, Asif, I said, hating the way my voice trembled. We're not bothering you. Oh, you're bothering me, Asif said, and I saw with a sinking heart what he had fished out of his pocket. Of course, his stainless steel brass knuckles sparkled in the sun. You're bothering me very much. In fact, you bother me more than this Hazara here. How can you talk to him? Play with him. Let him touch you, he said, his voice dripping with disgust. Wali and Kamal nodded and grunted in agreement. Asif narrowed his eyes, shook his head. When he spoke again, he sounded as baffled as he looked. How can you call him your friend? But he's not my friend, I almost blurted. He's my servant. Had I really thought of that? Of course I hadn't. I treated Hassan well, just like a friend. Better even, more like a brother. But if so, then why, when Baba's friends came to visit with their kids, didn't I ever include Hassan in our games? Why did I play with Hassan only when no one else was around? Asif slipped on the brass knuckles, gave me an icy look. You're part of the problem, Amir. If idiots like you and your father didn't take these people in, we'd be rid of them now. They'd all just go rot in Hazarajat where they belong. You're a disgrace to Afghanistan. I looked in his crazy eyes and saw that he meant it. He really meant to hurt me. Asif raised his fist and came for me. There was a flurry of rapid movement behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Hassan bend down and stand up quickly. Asif's eyes flickered to something behind me and widened with surprise. I saw that same look of astonishment on Kamal and Wali's faces as they too saw what had happened behind me. I turned and came face to face with Hassan's slingshot. Hassan had pulled the white elastic band all the way back, and the cup was a rock of the size of a walnut. Hassan held the slingshot directly and pointed directly at Asif's face. His hand trembled with the strain of the pulled elastic band, and beads of sweat had erupted on his brow. Please leave us alone, Agha, Hassan said in his flat tone. He'd referred to Asif as Agha, and I wondered briefly what it must be like to live with such an ingrained sense of one's place in a hierarchy. Asif gritted his teeth. Put it down, you motherless Hazara. Please leave us, Agha, Hassan said. Asif smiled. Maybe you didn't notice, but there are 3 of us, and 2 of you. Hassan shrugged. To an outsider, he didn't look scared, but Hassan's face was my earliest memory, and I knew all of its subtle nuances. Knew each and every twitch and flicker that ever rippled across it. And I saw that he was scared. He was scared plenty. You're right, Agha, but perhaps you didn't notice that I'm the one holding the slingshot. If you make a move, they'll have to change your nickname from Asif the Ear Eater to One Eye to Asif, because I have this rock pointed at your left eye. He said this so flatly that even I had to strain to hear the fear that I knew hid under that calm voice. Asif's mouth twitched. Wali and Kamal watched this exchange with something akin to fascination. Someone had challenged their god, humiliated him, And worst of all, that someone was a skinny Hazara. Asif looked from the rock to Hassan. He searched Hassan's face intently. What he found in it must have convinced him of the seriousness of Hassan's intentions, because he lowered his fist. You should know something about me, Hazara, Asif said gravely. I'm a very patient person. This doesn't end today, believe me. He turned to me. This isn't the end for you either, Amir. Someday I'll make you face me one-to-one. Asif retreated a step. His disciples followed. Your Hazara made a big mistake today, Amir, he said. They then turned around, walked away. I watched them walk down the hill and disappear behind the wall. Hassan was trying to tuck the slingshot in his waist with a pair of trembling hands. His mouth curled up into something that was supposed to be a reassuring smile. It took him 5 tries to tie the string of his trousers. Neither one of us said much of anything as we walked home in trepidation, certain that Asif and his friends would ambush us every time we turned a corner. They didn't, and that should have comforted us a little, but it didn't, not at all. For the next couple of years, the words economic development and reform danced on a lot of lips in Kabul. The constitutional monarchy had been abolished, replaced by a republic, led by a president of the republic. For a while, a sense of rejuvenation and purpose swept across the land. People spoke of women's rights and modern technology. And for the most part, even though a new leader lived in Arg, the royal place of Kabul, life went on as before. People went to work Saturday through Thursday and gathered for picnics on Friday in parks and the banks of Garga Lake in the gardens of Padman. Multicolored buses and lorries filled with passengers rolled through the narrow streets of Kabul, led by the constant shouts of the driver assistant who straddled the vehicle's rear bumpers and yelped directions to the driver in their thick Saudi accent. On Eid, the 3-day celebration after the holy month of Ramadan, Kabulis dressed in their best and newest clothes and visited their families. People hugged and kissed and greeted each other with Eid Mubarak, Happy Eid. Children opened gifts and played with dyed hard-boiled eggs. Early that following winter of 1974, Hassan and I were playing in the yard one day, building a snow fort, when Ali came and called him in. Hassan, Agha Sahib wants to talk to you. He was standing by the front door, dressed in white, hands tucked under his armpits, breath puffing from his mouth. Hassan and I exchanged a smile. We'd been waiting for his call all day. It was Hassan's birthday. Was it? What is it, father, do you know? Will you tell us? Hassan said. His eyes were gleaming. Ali shrugged. Agha Sahib hasn't discussed it with me. Come on, Ali. Tell us, I pressed. Is it a drawing book? Maybe a new pistol? Like Hassan, Ali was incapable of lying. Every year he pretended not to know what Baba had brought Hassan or me for our birthdays. And every year his eyes betrayed him, and we coaxed the goods out of him. This time, though, it seemed he was telling the truth. Baba never missed Hassan's birthday. For a while he used to ask Hassan what he wanted, but he gave up doing that because Hassan was always too modest to actually suggest a present. So every winter, Baba picked something out himself. He bought him a Japanese toy truck one year, an electric locomotive and train track set another year. The previous year, Baba had surprised Hassan with a leather cowboy hat just like the one Clint Eastwood wore in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which had unseated The Magnificent Seven as our favorite Western. That whole winter, Hassan and I took turns wearing that hat. and belted out the film's famous music as we climbed mounds of snow and shot each other dead. We took off our gloves and removed our snow-laden boots at the front door. When we stepped into the foyer, we found Baba sitting by the wood-burning cast iron stove with a short, balding Indian man dressed in a brown suit and a red tie. "Hassan," Baba said, smiling coyly, "meet your birthday present." Hassan and I traded blank looks. There was no gift-wrapped box in sight, no bag, no toy, just Ali standing behind us, and Baba with his slight Indian fellow who looked a little like a mathematics teacher. The Indian man in the brown suit smiled and offered Hassan his hand. "I am Dr. Kumar," he said. "It's a pleasure to meet you." He spoke Farsi with a thick, rolling Hindi accent. "Salam alaikum," Hassan said uncertainly. He gave a polite tip of the head, but his eyes sought his father behind him. Ali moved closer and set his hand on Hassan's shoulder. Baba met Hassan's weary and unpuzzled eyes. "I have summoned Dr. Kumar from New Delhi. Dr. Kumar is a plastic surgeon." "Do you know what that is?" the Indian man, Dr. Kumar said. Hassan shook his head. He looked to me for help, but I shrugged. All I knew was that you went to a surgeon to fix you when you had appendicitis. I knew this because one of my classmates had died of it the year before, and the teacher told us that they had waited too long to take him to a surgeon. We both looked to Ali. But of course, with him, you could never tell. His face was impassive as ever, though something sober had melted into his eyes. "Well, Dr. Kumar, my job is to fix things on people's bodies, sometimes their faces." "Oh," Hassan said. He looked from Dr. Kumar to Baba to Ali. His hand touched his upper lip. "Oh," he said again. "It's an unusual present, I know," Baba said, "and probably not what you had in mind, but this present will last you forever." "Oh," Hassan said. He licked his lip, cleared his throat. "Agha Sahib, will it, nothing doing," Dr. Kumar intervened, smiling kindly. "It will not hurt you one bit. In fact, I will give you a medicine, and you will not remember a thing." "Oh," Hassan said. He smiled back with relief, a little relief anyway. "I wasn't scared, Agha Sahib. Hassan might have been fooled, but I wasn't. I knew that when doctors said it wouldn't hurt, that's when you knew you were in trouble." With dread, I remembered my circumcision the year prior. The doctor had given me the same line, reassured me it wouldn't hurt one bit. But when the numbing medicine wore off later that night, I felt like someone had pressed a red-hot coal to my loins. Why Baba waited until I was 10 to have me circumcised was beyond me, and one of the things I will never forgive him for. I wished I too had some kind of scar that would beget Baba's sympathy. It wasn't fair. Hassan hadn't done anything to earn Baba's affections. He'd just been born with that stupid hairlip. The surgery went well. We were all a little shocked when they first removed the bandages, but kept our smiles on just as Dr. Kumar had instructed us. It wasn't easy, because Hassan's upper lip was a grotesque mesh of swollen, raw tissue. I expected Hassan to cry with horror when the nurse handed him the mirror. Ali held his hand as Hassan took a long, thoughtful look into it. He muttered something I didn't understand. I put my ear into his mouth. He whispered it again. "Tashakkur, thank you." Then his lips twisted, and that time I knew just what he was doing. He was smiling, just as he had emerging from his mother's womb. The swelling subsided, and the wound healed with time. Soon it was just a pink jagged line running up from his lip. By the following winter, it was only a faint scar, which was ironic, because that was the winter that Hassan stopped smiling. This concludes our reading of The Kite Runner from Off the Shelf. Your reader has been Hiba Harb. Now please join me in the additional programming from the Raleigh Network and have a wonderful day. Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That
You shouldn't have stayed. that long.
I stayed. I got here probably at 2 something, and I stayed until 4. So I stayed a while, and I haven't ate yet. So I'm gonna try to go eat.
Yes.